And on Monday, Indiana Senator Evan Bayh announced his decision to not seek re-election, saying, quote, Congress is not operating as it should. Well, some other Senate Democrats think one of the main problems with the way Congress is operating is the Senate's abuse of the filibuster, the tactic of delaying and blocking floor votes. Senate Republicans are currently using the filibuster to paralyze the Senate and derail Democratic initiatives, according to a McClatchy Newspapers investigation. Since President Obama took office, Republican senators have used the filibuster to stall legislation on health care reform, global warming, and financial regulation, and the confirmation of 15 Obama nominees. Last week, Senators Jeanne, Shaheen, and Tom Harkin introduced a bill aimed at curtailing the filibuster. Their proposal would gradually reduce the number of votes required to overcome a filibuster, so a simple majority of 51 votes could eventually end the debate. But Senate Majority Leader Reid dismissed their efforts, noting changing the rule would require 67 votes. Appearing on CBS's Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer Sunday, Vice President Joe Biden described the Senate's abuse of the filibuster as the worst he's ever seen.
Most people would agree that the United States Senate has never acted as consistently as they have to require a supermajority, that is 60 votes, to get anything done. That's a fundamental shift. I was there for 36 years. I don't ever recall it being abused and used as much as it has now.
Well, my next guest, Chicago-based lawyer Thomas Geoghegan, has been a vocal advocate of ending the filibuster. In a recent op-ed in the New York Times and an editorial in The Nation magazine, Geoghegan describes Senate Republicans' use of ghost or procedural filibusters as unconstitutional. He warns it silenced debate and will jeopardize the Obama presidency. Thomas Geoghegan is the author of See You in Court, How the Right Made America a Lawsuit Nation. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Thomas Geoghegan. Lay out how the filibuster works today, why we hear so much more about, well, can we get 60 votes than we did when the Republicans are in power, who seem to be much more concerned about getting 51.
Well, Amy, the modern procedural filibuster, or ghost filibuster, or filibuster without filibustering, began in 1975 when the old talking filibuster rule was changed to allow the Senate to put a cloture on debate with 60 instead of 67 votes. But what happened was that the practice of having senators filibuster just lapsed. The majority leaders of the Senate, especially the Democratic majority leaders, let the minority pretend or threaten a filibuster, and then everyone operated on the basis that there was a pretend filibuster going on, and the question then became whether you could cut off this filibuster where there's no Jimmy Stewart out there filibustering it. That was the big change, and that's why it's gone from a practice of 4 or 5 a congressional term to something like 130 a congressional term.
Can you explain, Thomas Geoghegan, the history of the filibuster?
Well, it's a tangled history. There was no filibuster when the founders put the Constitution in place in 1787. And when the first vice president sat as the presiding officer of the Senate, a man who happened to be Thomas Jefferson, and wrote a manual of Senate procedure, a simple majority could cut off debate. But Aaron Burr, remember Aaron Burr, who shot Alexander Hamilton? Well, he allowed unlimited debate. There was no rule for cutting off debate, but the rule wasn't abused in any serious way until the early 20th century, when in 1917 there was a rule put in to put a cloture or end unlimited debate, 2/3 rule. This was in 1917. But again, a talking filibuster was rarely used in the Senate. The Senate term could only accommodate 3 or 4 of these at the most, because you effectively had to, like in the Jimmy Stewart movie, shut down the whole government. So these were very rare and infrequent, and mainly used by Southern senators on Jim Crow laws and so forth. They were embarrassing to the Senate. Look at the Jimmy Stewart movie. It was an embarrassment. So they changed the rule to try to get rid of filibusters altogether. But at the time they changed the rule in 1975 to get rid of filibusters altogether, the Senate majority leaders, for some reason, just began as a gentlemanly, quote-unquote, sort of thing to let the debate be a pretend debate so that no one would be embarrassed. And that made it much easier for the minority to use. And that's why it's gone up from something that was a rare, paralyzing, shut down the government event once in a while to something that is used routinely now on every contested bill.
Thomas Geoghegan,
and it's turned the Senate into a supermajority.
Explain the supermajority.
Yes. Well, the supermajority, this Constitution is set up for majority rule in both houses of Congress. There are enough checks and balances on majority rule that you don't need a supermajority, except in certain cases where the founders in the Federalist Papers, and I mean Madison and Hamilton, with obvious guilt, explain why on a treaty or on expulsion of a member of Congress, you have to have a supermajority, a two-thirds vote. But there's no 60-vote rule anywhere in the Constitution. And in Federalist number 75, if anyone wants to look up their Federalist Papers, and in other essays in the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, Madison, explaining the Constitution, say that supermajorities would paralyze the operation of the government. So the Constitution has only specific occasions where a supermajority can be used, and it specifically says that the Vice President of the United States, as presiding officer, is the tiebreaker of the Senate, quote, when the Senate is equally divided, unquote. That means 50-50. So 50 plus one vice president is the majority rule under which the Senate is supposed to operate according to the Constitution. And today, it is 60 votes because it takes 60 votes, 60 senators, to cut off a pretend filibuster where nobody is really filibustering and effectively to enact the bill into law. A complete violation of the Constitution.
Thomas Geoghegan.
And,
yes,
Amy,
go ahead.
there's another provision it violates. If you look at Article 1, Section 5, those of you who have their constitutions out, you'll see a rule that the founders were very proud of. It's a rule that says a majority of legislators constitute a quorum. Normally, it's two-thirds. But the founders were so frightened that there'd be supermajority rule in either the House or the Senate that they put in this special procedural rule, which says only a majority is enough to constitute a quorum and enact a bill. Why is that? It's not just because it was a long time to get the stagecoach by Washington and people might not show up. It's because the founders were afraid that a minority under a two-thirds rule could just walk out of the House or the Senate and block the enactment of a bill, the appointment of a presidential nominee. In other words, to do exactly what's going on right now through the use of the procedural or pretend filibuster. So this is all blatantly unconstitutional.
What about those who argue that it's the filibuster that saved the country from Bush?
Well, it didn't. And one of the things that the filibuster did is it delivered the country to Bush. You know, if the filibuster has been used over and over to frustrate, well, I'm a labor lawyer, Amy, so 3 times there's been a frustration of the filibuster. It's passed the Senate by a majority, but not a supermajority, so we don't have labor law reform, we don't have unions, we have more inequality, people don't have pensions. And, you know, my friends go around and talk about, oh, globalization, globalization. I want to say to them, it's Senate Rule 22. You know, if it is the filibuster that frustrated the Carter agenda, that frustrated the progressive side of the Clinton agenda, that delegitimates the Democratic Party, people look at Barack Obama right now and say, well, he can't get anything done. We're frustrated with him. We'll vote in the Republicans. It is the filibuster that keeps delivering the country to the Republicans because the Democrats, thanks to the filibuster, are unable to govern. That's the horror of the thing. And the worst part is to have progressives turn around and say, now that the country is back in the hands of the Republicans, thanks to the filibuster, which has blocked labor law reform and health care and everything else, isn't it a good thing we have the filibuster because now we can stop Bush? I mean, it makes no sense. This is a horrible thing for progressives. The Senate exists, thanks to the filibuster, historically for 2 things. One was originally to protect slavery, and the second is to protect kind of low-wage labor. That's its basic function, and it is the main reason that we have this great inequality in the country today. We don't have one person, one vote in our country. We have this Senate rule where 2 senators from a state with 600,000 are equal to California with 36 million. It's not small states versus big states. it gives the conservative states an enormous veto over everything that could occur when a progressive majority takes over the presidency and the Congress.